Let's now go ahead and implement the exact same thing that we did in the last video, but this time using ES6 classes instead of constructor functions. So here again, I copied the initial person class that we built a bit earlier, so that now we can inherit from this class. All right, and so down here, let's now create the student class. So class student like this. Now, as we know already, the class syntax hides a lot of the details that are actually happening behind the scenes. Because classes are really just a layer of abstraction over constructor functions. But that's no problem because we already learned how inheritance between classes actually works behind the scenes. So that's what we did in the last lecture and the coding challenge. And so now that we know how it works, we are ready to implement the same thing using classes, even though that hides how it actually works behind the scenes. So, to implement inheritance between ES6 classes, we only need two ingredients. We need the extend keyword and we need the super function. So to make this student class inherit from the person class, all we need to do is to say extends and then the person class. So CL, and this one I'm also going to call CL here just to follow the same name. And that's actually it. So this keyword alone here will then link the prototypes behind the scenes without us even having to think about that. Then of course we still need a constructor, and this one will, just like before, receive the same arguments as the parent class, but then some additional ones. So birth year and also the course. Remember? Now here we actually don't even need to manually call like personcl.call like we did before in the constructor function, remember? So here we don't need to do that. What we do instead is to call the super function. And so super is basically the constructor function of the parent class. So the idea is still similar to what we did in the constructor function, but here it all happens automatically. We don't need to specify the name of the parent class again, because that already happened up here. So here now all we do is to pass in the arguments for the constructor of the parent class, and so that's these two, because that's exactly the parameters that are also specified here in the parent's constructor. Now here in this constructor, so of the child class, this always needs to happen first. So let me even write that here, needs to happen first. And that's because this call to the super function is responsible for creating the this keyword in this subclass. And so therefore, without doing this, we wouldn't be able to access the this keyword to do this. So always first the call to the super, so to the parents class constructor, and from there we will then be able to access the this keyword. Now, of course, we could actually have no other properties here at all. So this is not necessary. I mean, it's not mandatory. And so the same goes for this additional parameter. So in this case, this new student class would simply have new methods and share all the properties with the parent class. So what we're doing here is really just an example, but the possibilities are endless, right? And actually, if we didn't want to do this, then we wouldn't need any constructor function at all. So in this case, the super function would automatically be called with all the arguments that are passed into this constructor. So let me just create a new student here. So that's Martha. So new student CL, let's say Martha Jones, born in 2012 and also studying computer science. All right, but let me duplicate this here very quick. Take this one out and only call this with these two. And then, as I was saying, we could have no constructor at all. And this would still work just the same. So you see that now we would end up with a student with the full name and the birth year just as specified. Now remember that this underscore here still comes from this setter function here. So that's what we specified earlier. And so of course, now the student will inherit all of that. Because in the end, these are really just methods too. And so all the students will now inherit all of these methods from the parent class. But anyway, this was just to demonstrate you that if we do not need any new properties, then you don't even need to bother writing a constructor method in the child class. But now let's take this back. This as well, and of course also this. And now let's see if this worked. And yeah, so now we have all the three properties here. Okay, now let's just quickly add the introduce method. So let me copy that from earlier. There's no need to write the same code. So that's the simple console.log that we're going to execute here. So introduce. And so now we can call that on Martha.introduce. And we get my name is undefined here. But that's because here we actually have the full name and not the first name. And so now that actually works. And the same should work for the calcH method that is in the parent class. So Martha.calcH. And indeed, that works as well. And so let's now take a quick look here at the prototype chain one more time, just so you can see that the prototype chain is actually just the same as before when we created it manually. So you see that indeed in the prototype of Martha, we now have the introduce method. So that's this one right here that we wrote in the class. All right. But now in the prototype of the prototype, we have indeed the calcH method, and also the greet method, and the age and full name setters and getters. And so this proves us that the prototype chain was indeed set up automatically by basically by this extends keyword here, right? Now, finally, just like we did in the previous challenge, let's override one of the methods of the parent class. So let's override the calcH method here. And so all we have to do is to add a new calcH right here. And then let's simply log to the console I'm, and then the age, so 2037 minus this dot birth year, years old, but as a student, I feel more like, and then let's basically add 10 to this date, because when you are in university and you study a lot, then you will feel actually a lot older than you actually are. All right. And so now indeed, this new method overrode the one that was already there in the prototype chain. And again, that's because this new calcH method here appears first in the prototype chain. And so therefore, it is essentially overriding the method coming from the parent class. And we can also say that this calcH method here is shadowing the one that is in the parent class. And so that's actually it. That's all I have to show you about implementing inheritance between classes using actual ES6 classes. And just to make sure that you got this 100%, I invite you one more time to check out the slides from the previous lecture. So the lecture where we did the same thing using constructor functions. So these slides, so these theory parts of the video, I believe are really, really helpful to understanding this. Now, to finish this part of inheritance between classes, let me just say that this mechanism of inheritance that we explored here can actually be very problematic and dangerous in the real world when we are designing software. However, that's going to be a topic for another day, and we're going to talk a little bit about this when we talk about functional programming, which, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is kind of the alternative to object-oriented programming. Anyway, next up, let's do the same thing with object.create. So that's the third way of implementing object-oriented programming in JavaScript.